Farmers, trust is everything. At Genesis Fertilizers, we're not just proposing to build a facility, we're building a future designed for you. With real progress already underway, we're closer to providing Western Canadian farmers with a reliable, locally produced fertilizer supply. Now is the time to take control of your farm's future. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
New report out from BMO talking about the 9 key trends affecting Canadian agriculture. So we're going to bring in our guest here. It is Aaron Goertzen. He is a senior economist with BMO. Aaron, how are we doing?
Doing great. Pleasure to join.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, okay, so there's 9 trends identified, and I'm going to read them out first, and then we'll hit on some of them. So, trend number 1: world economy holding up. Trend number 2: abundant crop supplies, livestock looking a little leaner. We have trend number 3: low-flying loonie. Oh, that hurts any of us that are thinking about a U.S. holiday. Trend number 4: expensive inputs. Some of that's related to that dollar. Trend number 5: interest rates coming down the mountain. Yes, indeed. We have trend number 6: looser labor market. Trend number 7 is trade turmoil. Our audience is no stranger to that. And we have trend number 8: continued climate concerns. And finally, trend number 9 is productivity growth. Prestigious?
You got it.
Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, well, maybe let's circle back on what the heck that means. Okay, so as we look at these 9 trends, Aaron, there's a lot. The farmers are having to deal with a lot of things completely out of their control.
Yeah, it's absolutely right there. I mean, farming, even in we'll say the best of days or normal times, can be a pretty rocky affair. But there has been a lot happening on the macroeconomic front, on the geopolitical front, even a little bit closer to home on politics. So a lot of turbulence out there and a lot of different forces affecting the industry right now.
Now, do some of those trends trump some of the others, so to speak?
Yeah, it's fair to say that some are longer term, some are shorter term, some are more geared toward demand and supply. I would view falling interest rates in an environment of still pretty reasonable global economic growth as a real key for the near term, as far as demand and as far as pricing and farm finances. Obviously, with some offset from the fact that input costs still quite high and crop prices not as strong as a couple of years ago. So, again, a lot of moving parts, but some do trump others, it's fair to say.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this show about some of the concerns about where commodity prices are. But at the same time, those inputs have been a little bit sticky. I'm probably underscoring that for a lot. I'm understating that for a lot of our listeners. But a lot of concern. We looked at our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index going back to October. What are you concerned about? Commodity prices, input prices. Those are the 2 things that are more than everything else.
Yeah, for sure. And you see it in the data. When you look at, for example, Statistics Canada's measure of farm input prices, it's up about 35% over the past 5 years, and it hasn't reversed course at all, even as energy prices have come down. Fertilizer, select inputs have come back a little bit closer to earth, but that's been an offset in other areas. Obviously, the weak loonie making imported equipment costs significantly higher, and so we've seen farmers, crop farmers in an environment in particular, where there's been no relief on input costs, even as selling costs, crop prices have come down on somewhat stronger global supply and a few pretty strong global harvests.
Yeah, trade turmoil was trend number 7, like I mentioned. And a lot of this centers around what happens post January 20th after the inauguration. And we see the second trip to the White House for incoming President Trump. Any indications or foresight from the very, very smart people at BMO in terms of what this could mean for trade policy and how that impacts Canadian agriculture?
Yeah, one of the first things that economists, pundits will always say when talking about the possibility of a 25% tariff across the Canada-US border is that there's certainly an element of posturing at play here on the part of the incoming US administration. I don't think it's a reasonable baseline to expect that kind of a tariff to come into play, but it's still worth thinking about what might happen if you were to end up with that kind of a levy put in place. I think from a Canadian ag perspective, maybe an even more important piece is that even if we end up with something that looks like status quo trade Canada-US, if you have trade turmoil between the US and China, that could very easily spill over into Canadian agriculture. We saw this happen in 2018 with soybeans. China retaliated against US trade measures at that time by restricting its imports of soybeans, effectively flooding the North American market with supply and depressing prices not only for US farmers, but also for Canadian farmers. So even if we keep things on pretty good terms with the new US administration, there's a lot of risk if things get more challenging between the US and China from the perspective of the ag sector.
Yeah, let's talk about productivity. That's one that is mentioned a lot in economic circles when we think about Canada. From your standpoint, why is the focus on productivity important?
Yeah, people focus on productivity, and it gets a lot of attention from economists because if you want to sustainably grow living standards, you have to grow productivity, which is the amount of economic output produced per hour worked. And this is something that Canada has been doing not a great job at over certainly the past 10 years, even over the longer term. We have relative, particularly to the United States, lower levels of capital investment in Canada. And that hinders our productivity, hinders our living standards. The reason I bring it up in this report on agriculture, though, is because if there's one standout sector of the Canadian economy, it is the ag space, where productivity growth has been 6-7 times faster the Canadian average over the past 25 years. Farmers are producing about 3 times as much output per hour worked as they were in the late 1990s. An incredible performance that speaks to all of the technology and expertise being deployed in the sector.
How long can we sustain that? Can that growth continue for a number of years going forward?
Well, even when you look at very long-term measures of ag productivity, and crop yields are a great example. It's an area where even over decades and decades, productivity growth has been very strong. So it's not a recent development. It's not something I would view as a flash in the pan. You just need to go to a farm trade show and look around at some of the incredible equipment and technology that's being rolled out into the space to see that this isn't a trend that I would expect to slow down or stop anytime soon.
Trend number one was world economy holding up. We have a forecast for 2024. Canada's real GDP growth will be 1.3%. You're forecasting a 2020, or sorry, yeah, BMO's forecasting GDP growth in Canada of 2% in 2025. That's under the world forecast, though, of 3.2. Is this trend a positive, or are we concerned about it?
Yeah, so it's pretty natural that growth in Canada and other advanced economies tends to be a little bit below the global average, which also includes a lot of developing countries where they're playing technological catch up, and by doing so can post, as we see in China, very strong growth rates, even in a so-called bad year. In Canada, over the past couple of years, we've seen some pretty sluggish growth results, 1% range real GDP growth, even with very fast population expansion. I attribute that mainly to the high level of interest rates over the past couple of years. Canadian households in particular are quite sensitive to what happens with interest rates, given fairly high debt levels and mortgages that tend to reset much more quickly, for example, than in the United States. So that's been a drag on growth, but of course we are now in a falling interest rate environment, and heightened interest rate sensitivity is if anything a positive for growth when rates are coming lower. So with the Bank of Canada starting to effectively unshackle households and businesses to spend more and invest more, we do expect a stronger performance over the next couple of years.
So with that falling dollar, like we have seen, and you mentioned there can be some positives, especially for an export-focused nation like Canada is. Is there a threshold though where that dollar crosses a certain precipice and it's like, oh, okay, we're in bad territory now?
Yeah, I would say the weak loonie is troubling because it's resulting from Canada's economic underperformance. Our economy has grown more slowly than the US. As a result, interest rates north of the border never went as high. They're coming down more quickly. They'll probably end lower. And so it's those factors driving the loonie that I think are the concern. The low loonie for exporters is a positive story, particularly in the resource space, but even elsewhere, it's a benefit to Canadian competitiveness. It does, of course, affect the cost of imports and imported inputs. And so it can, past a certain point, begin to weigh on levels of investment. And of course, from the Bank of Canada's perspective, a very low loonie is inflationary. It increases the cost of buying foreign goods. So you don't want things to get too out of hand, but at the same time, with the loonie where it is now, and it's not in uncharted territory, it is offering, I would say, a well needed support for the Canadian economy after a tough couple of years.
We've lost 4 cents and change though in a pretty short period of time. Since middle of this September, we were 74 and a half ish. And you look at now, we're at the time of us doing this interview, we're at 70 flat, and we have traded into the 69 territory here today. So obviously the old trading saying of the trend is your friend, depending if you're importing or exporting, you're probably gonna have a different opinion on this trend.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the accelerated pressure on the loonie over the past couple of months has been very much driven by the incoming Trump administration and some of the concerns about what might happen on Canada-US trade. So there's very much a risk premium that's effectively being priced out of the loonie at this point. I think worth emphasizing, the loonie, of course, fluctuates through the business cycle and depending on the market's perception of risk in Canada and elsewhere. And there is ultimately a tethering point around purchasing power parity, a longer term equilibrium level that tends to be respected closer to 80 cents US. So I wouldn't say the loonie's on a path to get back there anytime soon, but if you want to talk, where do we head over the next 5 years, I would say higher is a more reasonable guess than lower. But in the near term, with the US economy firing on all cylinders, with the possibility of more fiscal stimulus south of the border and all these trade concerns, I wouldn't expect that turnaround to happen in the very near term.
And hey, to wrap up, Aaron, I just wanted your thoughts on this. In October, we did our latest Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index survey. We asked farmers about in the next 12 months, do you see widespread good times or bad times for the overall Canadian economy? Farmers were negative Canadian economy for the next 12 months. What do you see? As you look at these trends and some of the other factors, do you see a positive or a negative for the ag economy going forward?
Yeah, Canadian economy as a whole, we are more positive on it heading into 2025. The most important ingredient here being just the falling interest rate environment, which, as I've said, should really help to unshackle households, which have been struggling over the past couple of years with significantly higher interest payments, particularly holders of variable rate mortgages. So with rates now moving lower, things become a lot more comfortable for household finances, also for business finances. And I view falling rates as sort of a tide that lifts all boats. It will help in many ways across the Canadian economy. So we view a stronger growth environment, growth closer to 2% instead of 1%, even with likely slower population growth. You can point to other positives as well. A strong U.S. economy is good for Canada. It sounds like we have some fiscal stimulus on the way even north of the border. Of course, we currently have this GST, HST tax holiday. All of that tends to give a bit of a boost to growth in the near term.
Right.
And with an election around the corner, would expect the fiscal purse strings to stay pretty loose over the next couple of quarters. So I would say big picture, there are some positives to point to in the year ahead.
And you feel the same way about the ag economy, not just the Canadian economy in general?
Yeah, ag economy, of course, the ag's always tricky because what happens depends so much on Mother Nature. If you want to make an assumption of average or trend global crop yields, it is pretty clearly going to take some time for global crop inventories, which are elevated right now, to normalize. As they do so, though, you should begin to see prices, selling crop prices trend higher. That should help to improve margins a little bit. And of course, with costs where they are, that I think will be warmly welcome. At the same time, falling rates help the ag sector. Labor availability, not nearly as big of an issue as it's been a couple of years ago. So I certainly can't blame farmers for feeling a little bit down after what's been, frankly, a tough past year or two here. But I would say in the Canadian economy as a whole and in the ag space, things should be looking a little bit brighter in 2025.
Aaron, really appreciate you joining us here today. All the best to you. Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you in 2025, okay?
Merry Christmas. Thanks for having me.